They didn't ask. No one discussed anything, didn't consult, didn't wait for my consent. They just decided. As if all of this, my strength, my resources, my life, belonged to them by default, like hot water in the tap or a pillow on the sofa that everyone was used to. And, of course, they expected that same nod from me, barely noticeable, polite, which confirms that yes, everything is fine, I can handle it. They waited for that same forced smile that I learned to put on as a teenager, like a mask, because it's easier for everyone. And, of course, they believed that all of this would work, as it always worked. My name is Vivian Connors. I'm 28. I'm a senior accountant in a small, unknown financial firm with gray walls, long Excel tables and daily reports in which I have long since learned to find my own order. The work does not inspire enthusiasm, but it is honest, stable, and mine. No one outside this industry has even heard of our company name, and that's fine with me. I live a quiet life in an apartment complex where no one knows anyone else and even the postman leaves letters silently. No drama, no destruction, no loud arguments, and no constant rescuing of anyone. It's not a life to be admired, but it has something much more important: control. And before we continue, write in the comments what city you're watching this video from. Enjoy. Everything I have, I built myself. Brick by brick. My degree from a state college, which I earned while working nights at a cafe. My job, which I clung to and fought for because I knew that one wrong move and it would all collapse. My credit history, carefully assembled from small payments like a mosaic. And even my kitchen table, which I assembled myself that very first night when I moved into the apartment without help or instructions. No handouts, no gifts, no discounts. Just me, my efforts, and a quiet room where no one bothered me to be myself. But if you ask my family, they'll probably say I'm cold. Not because I ever yelled at them, slammed the door, or walked out like they do in the movies. No. It's just because I stopped cleaning up after them. Literally and figuratively. No longer stitching up holes, no longer pulling them out of holes, no longer covering up the traces of their own mistakes. I simply stopped being the one fixing it. You see, I have an older sister, Cameron. She's only 2 years older, but it feels like she's been 5 steps behind me my whole life, always yelling at me to wait. Cameron has this amazing talent for turning any failure into an epic tragedy, and, even more interestingly, shifting the blame for it onto everyone else. She was losing her job, her boss was toxic. She was being evicted, her roommates were jealous. She was late paying her bills again, the bank didn't notify her on time. It was as if the world was constantly conspiring against her, and everyone around her, including me, was supposed to understand and sympathize. My parents, Carol and Frank, never questioned it. They changed plans, rearranged schedules, and shifted boundaries for her. And if they couldn't cope with the aftermath of her latest crisis, they simply turned to me. You're stable, Vivian. You're lucky. The phrase ingrained itself in me like the scent of an old coat that can't be aired out. Lucky. As if I'd won the lottery instead of working 10 hours a day without a vacation. I helped. Car, help. Rent, help. New deposit on the apartment, of course. And every time I thought, maybe now they will say, thank you, not casually, not with this tired sigh, as if I had simply fulfilled my duty. But when I, however rarely, decided to say no, when I dared to set a line that I would never cross again, they looked at me as if I were a stranger. As if I were tearing the family apart, as if I were destroying the bridges that they themselves had turned into ropes stretched across the abyss. I understood this early. I am valued not for who I am, but for what I can give. My value is not in love. In usefulness. And even usefulness has a limit. I knew, one day they would find it. Sunday dinners in our house are a separate ritual. The same dishes, the same old china set, the same look from my mother, which gently but confidently pushes me to participate in what they have already decided. Everything was always familiar to the last detail. But that evening, something was different. Something in the air told me that something was about to happen that had already been decided for me. Mom met me at the door with a smile that was too forced, too shiny, to be real. I knew that smile. The smile before bad news. You look so thin, honey. Are you even eating normally? Her voice was sweet as syrup, always with the implication that you were tired, you were pushing yourself, and maybe that's why you didn't see how much you needed a family. Dad nodded silently, as always, looking somewhere through me, and quietly said, "Hi, baby." Cameron was already sitting at the table, bent over her phone, swiping her finger across the screen with that tense indifference that schoolchildren have when they've been called to the principal's office, when they already know a storm is coming, but they pretend nothing is happening. She didn't look up at me, didn't say a word, just blinked occasionally, as if she hoped to disappear behind that glowing screen. And, alas, I knew all these signals. They did not need to be deciphered. When Mom became overly affectionate, almost cloying, and Dad was silent, picking at his plate with his fork and hiding his eyes, it always meant one thing: they were preparing to tell me something they knew in advance. I would not like it. They had their own script, like a theater troupe, and all that was required of me was to play out the usual role, in which I get either salvation or guilt, and more often, both at the same time. We had already finished the salad. Mom, as usual, began to praise the weather, with the same intonation with which people talk about a long-forgotten achievement, as if she personally provided clear skies and a warm wind. Dad did not look up from his glass, continuing to fill it, as if he was trying to find some answer at the bottom, and Cameron picked at her plate as if the potato could come to life and bite her. Everyone was trying to create the illusion of a normal evening, but the tension hung in the air like a dull rumble before a thunderstorm. And then came the moment when my mother carefully placed her fork on the edge of her plate, folded her hands on the table, interlaced her fingers, the same gesture with which requests always began, wrapped in sweet guilt. The smile on her face was soft, but there was something learned in this softness, like an actress repeating a line she has rehearsed hundreds of times. "Vivian," she said quietly, almost a whisper, as if trying not to disturb the fragile balance in the room. "We've been talking with your father. Cameron is going through a difficult time right now, and we've decided that she's moving in with you for a while." The words were spoken casually, with the same intonation with which one might offer me a second piece of pie. No discussion, no hesitation, as if the decision had already been made, and all that remained was to present it beautifully, wrapped in care. Of course they expected me to agree, because I always did. And now they were looking at me expectantly, Mom with her gentle insistence, Dad with her defensiveness, Cameron with that frozen expression she wore when she knew she had gotten away with it again. The room went silent, thick and sticky like syrup. I felt their eyes on me, waiting to see if I would finally rebel. And if I did, they would be ready to call it selfishness, ingratitude, cruelty. I looked at Cameron. She suddenly looked up, and when she met my gaze, she immediately looked away, as if she were afraid. Dad cleared his throat, a sign that he was ready to argue, ready to defend a decision that had not been discussed. But I just smiled. Calmly, without any smirk or irony. "Sure," I said, as easily as if we were actually talking about cookies. "If it's what's going to help Cameron get back on her feet, I don't see why I shouldn't." There was silence. The kind that makes your ears ring. Mom blinked, and I saw her face twitch, as if she hadn't expected me to give in so easily. Dad exhaled, heavily, almost with relief, as if he'd just avoided an accident. Cameron leaned back in her chair, and a smug shadow slowly crept across her face, like moss on a rock after a rain, green, clinging, unpleasant. But none of them saw how I was freezing inside. How my hand slowly clenched the napkin in my lap, as if it were the only thing I could lean on. No one realized that they were wrong, that I had given in. That I had done the right thing, as always, the sensible thing, the family thing. But what they didn't know, and didn't seem to think to ask, was that I hadn't lived in the apartment they were planning to move Cameron into for weeks. The apartment that had once been my fortress, my sanctuary, my proof that I, too, could be an adult, no longer existed. I hadn't woken up one morning and decided to lie to my family. It wasn't an impulse, or revenge, or a whim. It was a summation. A summation of years, years of quiet disappointments, broken hopes, and small concessions, each one taking a piece of myself. I realized that in our family, Being strong meant being convenient, useful, accessible, like the medicine cabinet in the hallway. When I was 21, Cameron's car was repossessed. She cried, screamed, thrashed, said that if she couldn't drive, she wouldn't be able to hold down the new job she said would change her life. She said this time was different, that she'd learned that things would be different now. My credit was clean, and signing the contract with her seemed like a small thing, a small investment in her new beginning. 3 weeks later, she stopped showing up for work. Then she stopped paying. The debt piled up. And guess whose credit went down the drain? When I was 23, my mother called me late at night, sobbing into the phone. Their mortgage was defaulted. Dad had been laid off. Cameron came home. I didn't ask any questions. In the morning, I wired them $2,000. No one thanked me. For Christmas, my mother gave me a mug that said, "World's Best Daughter," and I almost laughed right there at the holiday table. And at 25, Cameron got caught drunk driving. The first time we even knew about it. Dad begged me to keep quiet, afraid it would damage the family reputation. I paid for a lawyer. Cameron didn't even thank me. And a year later, when she got pulled over again and I said no for the first time, my mother looked at me as if I'd betrayed them all. "You've never understood," she said then, "what it's like to really care about someone you love." And then she added, almost a whisper, but with a sting, "Cameron's life has always been harder than yours." The moment my mother said that Cameron's life was harder than mine, I didn't just suspect something, I understood. I understood everything. I knew it not in a rational sense, not as a logical conclusion, but as something that flares up in my chest and, like a flame, illuminates everything around me for a moment with a bright, merciless light. They did not see me. They did not see a person, did not feel pain, did not wonder what was behind my politeness and silence. They saw a tool. A function. A faucet that could be turned at the right moment if something in the house suddenly leaks, breaks, fails. A wallet with a smile. An uninterrupted source of support that could be called up with one message, one guilty sigh. They began to notice that I was changing, that I was increasingly gently declining requests, that my answers had become evasive, that when they said, "You don't mind, do you?" I began to say, "I'll think about it," instead of the old, "of course." And this worried them. Because I was no longer convenient. And therefore, no longer fit the usual role. One evening, I was alone in my apartment. The one I bought myself, without my parents' help, without my uncle broker, without extra gifts, just me, Excel spreadsheets, and endless patience. Every single thing in that apartment had its own price and its own story. The furniture was from an end-of-season sale. The carpet was from a local market, haggled over for half the price. The lamps were hand-assembled because I couldn't afford to pay for installation. And that night, sitting in that room, I suddenly looked at the front door and realized that I didn't feel safe. Not because someone was threatening me from the outside, but because that door wasn't mine anymore. It had become a thoroughfare. My time, my money, my weekends, my space, as soon as they needed something, it all stopped being mine. It became ours. They didn't have to ask, they just had to state their need. And then I made a decision. I didn't mull it over for weeks, I just got up and did it. I called a realtor. I sold the apartment, quietly, officially, without drama. I didn't make a scene, didn't throw keys, didn't write letters of explanation. I just left. I moved into a small rented apartment on the other side of town. A room without any special amenities, with windows overlooking a parking lot and a stove with one burner that didn't work, but there was one main thing there: silence. No one asked where I was now, and I didn't tell. Not because I wanted to punish them. Not because I was angry. But because, for the first time in many years, I wanted to survive. I wanted to breathe. Sometimes, when you grow up in a family where you are noticed only when you are useful, the kindest thing you can do for yourself is to disappear just long enough for your own breath to return. The correspondence began on Monday. The first message came from Mom: "Cameron's mattress will be delivered Saturday morning." Then the second: "Frank will load the boxes on Friday night." Then a third, she's glad she's finally going to have her own space. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. They weren't talking to me, but to a version of me that had died long ago. The one who always said yes, even when everything inside was screaming. The one who saved, even when she was drowning. Each message assumed I would open the door, put things away, prepare the room, and do it all without asking, without making a fuss, like I always did. But they didn't know. I don't listen anymore. I don't read between the lines. I don't respond to guilt. I've become someone else, a person with limits. By Thursday, Mom was texting every day. The messages were shorter, more urgent. If you need anything cleaned up before we move, just say so. Then, Cameron says she won't be a burden. She'll bring her own dishes. I couldn't help but chuckle as I took a sip of my morning coffee. Her own dishes. It almost sounded like a joke. I knew Cameron hadn't washed dishes even at her own place in years. Her sink was always piled high with cups, plates, forgotten food. But I let it happen. I didn't argue. I didn't correct. I just watched, silently, letting them believe everything was going according to plan. Deep down, I was waiting, not for the move, not for the conversation. I was waiting for Saturday morning. I left early. Without a note, without a call. Just put on my jacket, grabbed my keys, and walked out. First a coffee at a small coffee shop where the barista already knew my name, then a long drive through town with no destination. I walked through a farmer's market with no intention of buying anything. Just walked, enjoying the warm June sun, lingering at the stalls that smelled of strawberries and lavender and fresh bread. My phone vibrated 3 times in my pocket, but I didn't check. I knew who it was. I knew why. The 4th call came under my name, Vivian. It was my mother. But her voice, it wasn't her usual quiet voice. It was fragile, pierced with worry. "What's going on?" Her voice rang like glass about to crack. "There's someone here. A man. He says he lives in the apartment. He says you don't live there anymore." I let the silence stretch. Let her feel it. Weightlessness. Out of control. A space where her words no longer mattered. "You didn't tell us anything," she said, not pleadingly but reproachfully. I heard it not as pain but as resentment that the scenario had not gone as planned. "No," I answered calmly. "You didn't." In the background, I heard the rustling of bags, a dry shuffling, as if someone was setting bags down on the concrete or stacking boxes, unsure whether to continue. My father's voice grew quieter, as if he had moved away a little, perhaps trying to process something, to digest it, to keep the words from coming out too abruptly. Cameron muttered something, quietly, irritably, as if she had thrown out a remark she didn't expect me to hear. "Vivian," my mother said my name through clenched teeth, as if breathing fire, the way she does when she loses control. What does that mean?" I stood there, looking out the window, and said calmly, without emotion, without defense, just as it was, "I sold the apartment. I did it weeks ago." My mother's voice wavered. "You, what?" I answered evenly, without adding unnecessary details, without offering an apology. "I left. Quietly. I just didn't think it would matter. No one asked where I lived. So I didn't say." There was silence on the other end of the line, thick and tense, like before a curtain falls. I could almost picture them standing there on the unfamiliar porch, confused, their bags down, their arms crossed, looking at each other as if they were co-conspirators in a failed plot, and finally realizing that they had planned more than just a visit, more than just help. They had planned an invasion. Only they had arrived not at the fortress where they were expected, but at gates whose locks had long since been changed. And then, finally, my father's voice came, tense, not loud, but already building with discontent. "You lied to us," he said. "You said she could move." I closed my eyes for a second and, composing myself, said clearly, "I said if it helps Cameron, I don't see why not." But I didn't say where. There was another pause, and then, like a synchronized breath, I heard the sound of both Mom and Cameron holding their breath at the same time, realizing the meaning of what had been said. It was final. I heard Mom ask, "So what? Are we supposed to, what?" Her voice was suddenly thinner, higher, not irritated, but confused. It sounded young, like those rare moments when she allowed herself to be vulnerable. And for one brief moment, I almost responded, almost took a step forward, but I didn't. Because I knew that what I was doing wasn't out of spite. I didn't change the locks to punish them. I didn't sell the apartment to rub their noses in it. I did it because I was tired of living in a space that had never been truly mine to begin with. I did it because, for the first time, I wanted a place to return to that wasn't with anxiety, but with relief. I did it because I was tired of being the first to shoot, and because sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone who refuses to change is to stop giving them space to do so. They thought that this was the end. That since I left, it meant I hid. They were wrong. Because by evening, as I expected, they were already standing at my door. I knew that they would not leave it like this. Even when I drank coffee in the morning, even when I allowed myself to miss all the calls, I knew my mother would not rest until she found it. She would call, dig, find out who rents out apartments, who I wrote to, and in the end she would show up to prove, no matter how far I went, I was still her daughter, and therefore available. Obliged. Subordinate. When the sun began to slide along the cornices and paint the windows with amber light, I heard a knock. 3 quick, precise blows, like a polite but restrained sentence. The same knock behind which a hidden rage hides, restrained to the limit. I stood up, went to the door, looked through the peephole. And there they were, Carol and Frank and Cameron, and the trunk of the car, crammed with boxes, as if it really were moving day, as if nothing had changed. I opened the door halfway, braced my hand on the frame, and said flatly, without greeting or excuse, "You found me." My mother stood there, her face flushed, her lipstick faded as if rubbed off by hesitant fingers, her hair combed back, a sign that she had run her hands through it 20 times in the last hour. "We tried to call," she said, smiling tightly. "We didn't think you'd really be here." Her voice was shaking. "We didn't think you'd be here." I looked at them, at the suitcases, at the tense faces, at Cameron, standing slightly to the side but with that mask on her face that always appeared when things weren't going her way. "This is my apartment," I said simply. And then my father spoke, louder, more forcefully, his tone sharp. "But you said she could move. And now we're here with her stuff, and you're standing there like we don't belong." I didn't move. I didn't raise my voice. I just reminded him. I never said she could move here. I said if it would help Cameron, I don't see why not. It was in that apartment. In the old house. Where, if you remember, I don't live anymore. Cameron took a step forward. Sharply. But then she stopped, crossing her arms over her chest. Her cheeks were flushed, but I knew that flush, not from shame. From anger. From the same thing that made her feel like she was being told no. "That's petty, Vivian," she hissed. "You always act like you're above us. But that's not noble. That's just cruel." I bowed my head, not defiantly, not annoyed, but with the hard-won clarity that comes only after years of silent service to others, after endlessly waiting for someone to finally understand that you are a person, too, and not an eternal safety net. "You packed your things," I said slowly, clearly, and drove across town to move into an apartment whose existence you never even bothered to check. I said it calmly, as if it were obvious, and for a split second I felt something in them falter, as if my words had finally begun to pierce the armor they had spent years building out of expectations and resentments. "It's not cruel," I added, looking straight at Cameron, "it's right." Cameron opened her mouth as if she were going to respond sharply, angrily, as usual, but her voice wavered, as if anger and confusion were warring within her. "You're my sister," she breathed, like a final argument, like a card to throw on the table even when everything was lost. "Yes," I answered, just as evenly, just as detachedly, "and for years you've been confusing that with free housing." And it was true. They had always taken kinship as an IOU, as an open-ended subscription to help and understanding, regardless of the circumstances. My father stepped forward, stood between us, his voice grew louder, and there were familiar notes in it. Not a request, but an order, the same intonation he always used when he wanted to end a conversation without going into the essence. Enough, Vivian. We're not leaving. We've put up with a lot from you. You owe your sister. And there it was, the very word that was always hanging in the air, but no one said out loud, debt. Like every dollar I'd ever sent, every account I'd closed, every night I'd spent awake, I owed by default, as a subject to the crown, not a daughter, not a sister, not a person. Like all those sacrifices were part of some silent contract I'd never signed. I took a step back and calmly picked up the phone from the table. Mom tensed, her eyes narrowed. "What are you doing?" she asked, as if guessing but not believing. I didn't answer. I unlocked the screen, dialed. The first ring, then the second, then the third. Then 911. The operator answered cheerfully but with professional detachment. 911, what is your emergency? My voice didn't waver, didn't rise. It was level, clear as a sheet of paper. Yes. I have family members outside my apartment who refuse to leave. They are not registered as residents. They were not invited. I'd like to report this as trespassing. There was a pause. Cameron's jaw dropped, as if she didn't believe I was capable of this. Dad cursed quietly, more under his breath, with that hint of helpless rage that comes when things are getting out of control. Mom. Mom looked like I'd hit her. Vivian, she whispered, and there was no anger or threat in her voice, just surprise, almost a plea. You're calling the police, on your own family? I looked her in the eye, not looking down, and answered quietly, I asked you to leave. You refused. The dispatcher asked for the address. I gave it to her. Cameron's voice shook, but now with rage. You're going to ruin everything, Vivian. Do you know what people will think? What will they say about you? I nodded, calmly, almost sadly. Yes. They'll say I finally stopped answering the door. Mom blinked. Her lips twitched, but the words wouldn't come. Then her voice dropped to a barely audible whisper. You used to be kind. I didn't flinch. I didn't look away. You used to know when I was hurt. There was something ancient in her voice, something that might once have been sincere. But the silence that hung between us wasn't empty. It was heavy. Filled with every line broken, every truth left unsaid, every yes said when I wanted to scream no. It was the silence I'd been waiting for years. The patrol car pulled up 10 minutes later. A young woman in uniform stepped out, tall, confident, her hand on her hip, but not tense. Her gaze was calm, even neutral. Good evening, she said, approaching the entrance. We've received a call about an attempted trespassing. I nodded. It's me. The officer looked at my parents, at Cameron, at the car with its bags, loaded to the brim with boxes. She didn't raise her voice. Ma'am, sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave this premises. This is our daughter, Dad said, trying to sound firm, but his voice cracked. This is a family matter. And this is her residence, the officer replied calmly. And it cannot be occupied by you without her consent. Cameron had the expression of someone who was about to cry, or drop something heavy, or both. She took a step toward me and hissed, You're going to regret this, Vivian. I sighed, and for the first time in a long time, there was no fear in that sigh. No, I said, to be honest, I regret almost everything I've done up to this point. And this is the first thing I'm sure of. The next morning, I woke up to a new silence. No alarm clock, no expectation of a blow. I opened my phone to see 12 missed calls. 5 from Mom, 2 from Dad. The rest were unfamiliar numbers. Cousins, probably. Or family friends. People I hadn't spoken to since college. Then, as expected, the text messages began. One after another, like raindrops that sound almost harmless at first, but soon turned into a downpour. "How could you do this to your own sister?" they would say, as if reminding me of something I had long ago stopped forgetting. "Your mom is devastated," they would add, as if that were something new. "Cameron is sleeping in a car," and I could see the implication behind those words. "You did this. This is on you." "Is this what you wanted?" they would ask, hoping that the guilt would still find its way into my chest and squeeze it like it used to. But I didn't answer. I just stared at the screen, scrolling through the lines like a chronicle that would end in blame no matter what I said. And then I saw it. Mom's Facebook post. 3 paragraphs, peppered with broken-hearted emojis, with an old photo of Cameron attached. She was about 7 years old, holding a teddy bear and looking at the camera like all children, with that naive openness that adults use for so long to manipulate our memories. Mom wrote that they raised Cameron and me with love and care, that they believed in sisters being there for each other, especially in difficult times. But, she said, one of us, having become successful and lucky, somehow forgot what it meant to be part of a family. "Our hearts are broken," she concluded. "Vivian turned her back on us just when we needed her most. Cameron didn't deserve this. None of us did." Hundreds of likes. Dozens of comments from people I hadn't seen since grade school, who didn't know a single chapter of this story, but were already calling me cold, selfish, arrogant. It wasn't new. It just got louder. And for the first time in my life, I responded. Not with a long post, not an excuse, not a sob story. Just facts. I posted a screenshot of the $2,000 wire transfer I'd used to pay off my parents' overdue mortgage. Then a document with my name on Cameron's car loan, and a screenshot of the foreclosure notice after she stopped paying. Then a photo of the receipt for the lawyer who defended her in her drunk driving trial. Then a timeline of all those one-off services, of which there were actually more than 24, starting before I turned 21. I ended the message with a picture of the apartment sales receipt, and finally, a screenshot of the conversation where, 2 years ago, Cameron called me a boring robot because I refused to give her time to fall apart without a schedule. At the very bottom, I wrote, I didn't abandon my family. I just stopped doing emotional support work for free. No hashtags. No pathos. After that, I turned off my phone. Not out of fear. Not out of weakness. But because I didn't need applause. I only needed silence. And this time, I got it. That night, the apartment was truly silent. No knocks on the door, no vibrations from incoming messages, no clicks of other people's expectations. Just the measured hum of the refrigerator and the occasional, almost comforting creak of the old pipes in the walls. I brewed chamomile tea. Not to fall asleep. I no longer needed an escape from sleep. I needed a ritual. I held the soft mug in both hands, feeling the steam rise up, as if forgiveness were rising from within, not for someone, but for myself. My phone lit up once. A message from my mother. Another from Cameron. I didn't open either one. I didn't need to. I knew their rhythm by heart. Shock. Anger. Guilt. Pleading. Always in that order. I blocked both numbers, not out of malice, not out of pride, but because I realized that not every door deserves to be knocked on again and again, hoping that someone inside still wants to open it. I went out onto the balcony. The air was cold, but not biting. It was a cold that reminded you that you were alive, that you were not in a dream, not in a role, not in someone else's fairy tale. Below, the city went on living. Cars honked, headlights slid across the asphalt. Someone walked a dog in a jacket a couple of sizes too big for spring, but apparently familiar. The woman downstairs, the one who always kept flowers on the windowsill, looked up and waved at me. I waved back, and the gesture, simple and fleeting, was more honest and real and human than most of the things I'd done out of a sense of duty over the past 10 years. Back inside, I slowly turned off the lights. In the living room. In the kitchen. In the hallway. The walls were empty. No photographs. No frames with faded signatures. Just space. Just peace. I didn't feel like a winner. I didn't feel better. I didn't feel broken. I just felt like I was done. Off stage. Finally allowed myself to stop explaining that I was not a spare oxygen mask for those who refused to learn to breathe on their own their whole lives. Somewhere out there, I was sure, they were going to rewrite history again. To make me out to be a monster. Ruthless. Ungrateful. Let them. They needed it more than I did. I didn't come into this life to be loved for my compliance. I came to finally stop pretending that I wasn't being erased. And if they wrote their version, so be it. Because now my story had been told. And it was me who wrote it.